part of the symposium. So there's the second session that will be chaired by Nicola Pagan. And we're going to have two talks, the first by Andrea Censi and the other by David Shaw, followed by the panel discussion at the end. Right, thank you.
So let me introduce Dr. Andrea Censi. He's a senior researcher with the Department of Mechanical and Process Engineering at ETH Zurich. He earned a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science in Automation and Control Engineering and Robotics from Università La Sapienza in Rome. And he earned a PhD in 2013 from Caltech. And from 2013 to 2017, he was a research scientist at MIT. So he also has experience working in the industry in the field of self-driving cars. And his interests are in robotics and in co-design of complex systems. So today he will talk about CARMA economy for socially efficient and equitable autonomy. So really looking forward to your talk, and stage is yours.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. I give this talk on behalf of many other people. In particular, I want to highlight Haizat Elokta, who is in the audience, who is the PhD student actually did a lot of this work. And of course, if there's anything controversial, then it's not his fault, but it's Florian Dorfler's fault. So I want to start very general. I want to talk about resource sharing and in the context of a society. And then I will go and talk about mobility systems in particular. We evolved to work in small groups. You know, we said that once tribes were up to 300 people, so you all knew each other, right? And in a small group, you can do resource sharing very effectively. For example, from Italy, so I make the example of coffee. So in Italy, you go have a coffee with your coworkers, and then you actually fight for who is to pay, right? The system works because all know each other, and then eventually there cannot be any freeloaders, right? And this is a very, if you wish, altruistic system, and it's particularly good because it embodies the principle that of today me, today you, right? I do something for you today because I know that you will help me in the future. And I like this quote: civilization starts when people start helping each other out. The problem is that this kind of system that works nowadays, also in small groups, doesn't expand to cities and civilization. So in particular, in the last, let's say, 100 years, went to societies where perhaps many people lived in villages, right? My grandfather was a farmer in a little town in Italy, 2,000 people. The next generation, actually, my mother and my father went to the big city, Rome, right, to actually get a degree, right? But now, for myself, I lived internationally, and now apparently I'm speaking to people all over the world through this microphone, and so now my web of interaction is much bigger, but much weirder, right? And the problem is that a lot of these interactions, I mean, you might say that talking to somebody in China now is the same as they are here today, right? But the thing is that it's not just person-to-person interaction, but also interactions that are mediated by algorithms. Right? And this doesn't scale, and this is the thing that is now different. I have a couple of examples. I will not spend much about this because it was in the previous talk, right? But the idea of, if you think about it now, we have a lot more information, we have a lot more possibilities of discussion. So you could imagine, well, if 50 years ago, you could have thought about, oh, in the future, we will all have enlightened discussions with people all over the world, we converge to world peace and so on, right? But in practice, what we get is that propagation of fake news and this problem of polarization, right? You hear what you want to hear. But a different example that has to do with reputation are these reputation systems that are mediated by technology. For example, when you ride a Uber, you have the possibility of scoring the interaction, and your Uber driver does that as well, right? And this is necessary because you don't never meet the same Uber driver again if you're in a big city, right? So you rely on the algorithm that Uber uses to keep track of this reputation, right? And you expect that to be fair. And then sometimes you see in the cars, you see, if you give me less than 5 stars, I cannot work for Uber anymore. Right? So particularly there's some limitations there. Now today I'm going to talk about mobility. Previously in our lab, we thought about mobility from the perspective of the firm. For example, how can Uber achieve better profits by guiding the fleet in a particular way? But lately we are going towards thinking about the point of view of society, and particularly government as the actor of society. So we like to understand questions like what infrastructure to build, what subsidies to give, so that it's not about just the quality of service, which was the metric that we use for private firms, but you care also about these ideas of fairness and equitability. And the big problem is actually understanding exactly how to measure those properties. So today I'm going to talk about infrastructure as a resource that's common and that needs to be allocated. Now, from a very high point of view, it's useful to think about trade-offs that are there always, right? And I chose 3 axes for today. One is efficiency, the other is fairness, the other is scalability. And efficiency and fairness come with an asterisk because actually we need to get into the details how to define those. But so far, if you think about intuitively about these metrics, then it's okay. So I will compare centralized control, so the idea that there is somebody who knows everything about everybody. So, and you can choose what to do for everybody, then you can achieve certainly maximum efficiency, maximum fairness, right? You decide what to do, but it's not scalable. I will talk about reputation as something that allows, it's a little bit more scalable and achieves a reasonable fairness and efficiency. I will talk a lot about the all interactions that are mediated by money. And money for us is something that is certainly scalable. Scalable means that you can interact with money with anybody else, right? You don't care about where that money comes from. And it's also efficient, depending on your definition of efficiency, is actually, it is, free markets are efficient, but if you change a little bit the definition of efficiency, maybe they're not efficient anymore, but certainly it's something that's very, very scalable. Our idea is that of a CARMA system that sits in the middle of this trade-off. We show that in some problems we achieve very high efficiency and fairness, and also it's very scalable. So now I'll talk a little bit more in detail about all of this. First, centralized control. The idea is simple. If there's somebody who knows everything about everybody and can control everything that you do, then certainly they can achieve any objective that you choose, right? What are the issues? One is that is the cost of the centralized infrastructure, right? The other is that you need to know the true preferences of everybody, right? And then consequently, like as the user, then you need to really trust the system that doesn't do anything bad with the data. And so in fact, this is, for me, it's only applicable in kind of small systems. As another alternative, I would put social credit systems, which is something that's been rolling out in China, for example. And I think this will be remembered as one of the most important inventions of the 21st century. And the idea is the following. So there's a central authority that keeps a score, okay? And the enabler is that a lot of the interactions of society are mediated through technology that can be controlled. So the central authority knows what you do. Now, depending on what you do, you may have your score decreased or increased. And then your score basically allows you or disallows you to access some goods or services. For example, you might be denied transportation on certain trains. Now, of course, there's been a lot of critiques about this from the Western media, right? But the idea is that actually this works great, but under some assumptions, right? So one assumption is that you have to trust the authority to have the best interest of everybody at heart, right? And this is actually very similar to Aristotle said, the best form of government is the enlightened prince, right? Enlightened dictator, right? Then, in addition to trusting that somebody has your best interest in mind, also you should trust that maybe, you can think about it, maybe the intentions are good, but there are some unintended consequences, right? So you must trust the implementation as well. Now, let me talk a little bit about reputation, trust, and altruism from the sociological point of view. So it is actually thought that the reason we beat the other monkey-like animals is because we grew big brains so that we can actually navigate this world of personal relationships. And so we can actually get to the equilibrium where people not just compete about resources, but they help each other. Right? And one thing that I want to highlight is that this idea of extreme altruism, that's an instinct in us, where you are forced, so even you prefer to get some damage yourself if you can prevent an injustice in somebody, right? You say, this is a, so it's a form of, so it's not just when it's about you, it's also about preventing injustice for other people. And by the way, so this is a lot of social interactions still happening this way in small tribes, also small towns in Italy. Everyone knows each other. Like, your money is not good here. You have to be accepted and trusted for actually do something in a little town. Now, from the game theory point of view, there's a large body of work that says essentially when you have a game that's repeated, you can always have an equilibrium. The reason being that if you have a mechanism for which you can punish the factors, and the game is infinite, so while if it's a single shot game, it's very difficult to understand. But if you repeat and you have the possibility of basically build up reputations and use, for example, tit for tat strategies where you cooperate first and then you copy what the other did, these are all equilibria of the infinite games. Right? So the problem with this is that it works in a setup where you know the players, so you know the identities, right? You can keep track of reputation. And so this idea doesn't really work in big populations. Now, what about monetary markets? And so the idea of karma is really in contrast with money. And so we had long discussions about, okay, about what exactly is money about. So there's a few assumptions, I think. One is that, there are two assumptions. One is that money is a universal measure of utility, in the sense that when you pay for something, you pay proportionally to the utility that it gets to you. And the other is that money is a universal measure of credit. So somehow your bank account is the summary of all the interactions you did with society. And if you had more money, it means that you were more useful to society. Right? Now, with these assumptions, then you can think a lot of mechanism design as basically revealing the utility that you have for something, right? So, for example, for second price options, you can you like that mechanism as a game theorist or as an economist because it allows people to say the true preferences about money. Now, the more we thought about this, the more we thought, okay, it's a more general philosophy problem, right? And I like to highlight a little bit the difference between what the typical neoliberal economics view of the world is versus maybe social democracy. So if you really believe in neoliberal economics, then you think that there's an invisible hand of the market that makes everybody better off. There's this second assumption that is that firms' welfare induces individual welfare, right? So if companies make money, then they can hire people with higher salaries, and so the wealth trickles down. And the consequence is that you measure prosperity in dollars. Instead, there's a social democracy view, which is I would say a little bit more European, is that there are basic needs that must be satisfied: healthcare, education, housing, and so on. And then this idea that, well, you don't just want to measure prosperity, you also want to measure some other quality of society, right? And from you say, well, a good society is a just society. Now, so for the critique of the neoliberal economics for me is the following. So there's a nice paper here about this idea that money is actually memory, right? But what are the issues here? In particular, like I don't want to say, money is bad, right? Let's think about the issues. One is that not all money is made honestly. You can steal money, but also not all money is made honestly, right? Because there are things that are legal that we wouldn't consider ethical, right? Second issue is that there's just too much memory, right? Because somehow you can gift your wealth to the next generation. And so what happens, there are dynasties of people that are super rich because maybe their ancestors did something that was good for society, or maybe not. Right? There's this idea now, a lot of the economy now is financial economy, right? So the idea that somehow you can make money from money, it kind of breaks already a little bit the first assumption that you get money for goods and services, right? And then there are other issues like it feels really weird that you can compress one's contribution to society into one scalar number, right? I will note that as academics, we get paid much less than our colleagues in industry, even though maybe we give more to society. At least that's my feeling. Right? Okay, so now I will talk about CARMA, and really, I think this works best if you think you remove all about money, you think about, well, we live on a planet, everything is a shared resource, right? And money, just one particular way that people that evolved, came up to be, to allocate these shared resources. Okay, so I already said CARMA is something in the middle, and I will now introduce a simple resource allocation problem. So this is the simple example. It's supposed to be clear. And it's an idea where you have two agents competing for one resource. For example, if you had two cars that want to cross an intersection. Okay, so the resource here is the space-time section that you need to cross the intersection. Okay? And the question is, who goes first? We are going to use the letter U to define the private urgency. Right? So this is something intrinsic to you. It's mostly meant to compare different days for you. Maybe today you're urgent, tomorrow you're not urgent. But it doesn't have to be like a global scale of urgency. And then we assume that there's some kind of Markov chain that changes your urgency, right? So maybe you know that Monday to Friday you're urgent, and then Saturday, Sunday you're not, deterministically, or maybe it's a little bit stochastic, right? Now, in a small community, you can imagine if you all know each other, then the solution is simple. You just tell each other the urgency, and there's this incentives for people to be truthful, right? Because otherwise, if they're always urgent, they will be flagged as a freeloader, right? Now, this idea that private agents' histories, it doesn't scale at all, right? Especially when you think about interactions in which you never interact with the same agent again. Okay, so that breaks entirely all the assumptions about reputation. Okay, now just for a kind of strawman argument, what about tossing a coin? I will just toss a coin to decide who goes. Now, if you define the efficiency as minus the sum of costs, right, where the cost of going first is 0, otherwise it's the urgency that you have, then you get the maximum efficiency when the car with the highest urgency goes, right? So if you toss a coin, this is inefficient because you're not letting the best player go, right? So we said that it's agnostic to the private needs of the agent. Now, is tossing a coin fair? And now we start to have look at the asterisk, okay? Because there are various definitions of fairness and equitability, and we're kind of trying to find our way through all these definitions, right? And the thing is that sometimes it's a big difference. Sometimes it doesn't really matter. But there's a big difference between the first two. So first one is what we call the equal opportunity of access, right? So this means how much you use the shared resource. So I don't care what is your internal state. I just look at whether you actually use the resources that you are competing for, right? So that's, for example, that would be probability that you go is the same as probability that I go. So coin toss is fine, it's fair according to the first definition. The second one is equal outcome, right? Now the cost is private, and so the coin toss is not fair according to that. Then there is another notion which we call the reparation. Now, notice the following. Like, let's look again at the fairness definition number one, tossing a coin. Now, this is basically like a random walk in the space of cost that you incur, right? So there's nothing that allows you to be more lucky if you were not lucky before, right? So you can have a very fair mechanism that is instantaneously fair, but that allows people's fortunes to drift, right? So if you want to avoid that, you have to have something stronger, which we can call reparation, where the future cost that you incur, conditioned on the past cost that you incurred, should be the opposite sign of the past cost, right? And now, for that, now we know that converges to something that's similar to everybody. What about money? So money here would be the fact that you just have an option, maybe, right? And this we don't call it fair because the road is a public good, but not everybody has the same money. So the rich people goes first always, right? So monetary solutions are also inefficient depending how you define efficiency. So if you define efficiency based on the private urgency, then if you think that private urgency is uncorrelated with the money that you have in the bank, then it's not efficient. But you can say that monetary solutions are efficient and fair if you follow these assumptions, right? So one is that the assumption that what you have in the bank is your credit to society. You believe that that credit can be converted into time, and then you'll accept that the value of your time might also depend on somebody else's bank account, right? Because when you go, you're happy to accept that. All right, so now I will introduce you the CARMA mechanism. And this is the simplest example where you have two agents and pairwise interactions, and then later we see interactions with infinite agents. So the idea is that there is a counter called CARMA for each agent, and whenever two agents compete for a resource, they bid CARMA. And you can see in this animation, in this picture, that the blue car bids 1, the second car bids 4. Then there's this conflict resolution rule that could be the following. So if you bid more, you use the resource, but then you have to pay the CARMA to somebody who didn't use the resource. There are a lot of variations where you pay the CARMA either to the agent, or you can pay to society, you can pay the entire bid, you can pay the difference. Actually, numerically, they all get similar results quantitatively. So for now, we just use the simplest example. So you pay all the bid to the second player. And so tomorrow, you're now at the same intersection, but you have more CARMA, right? If you lost your chance the day before. And so the idea is that CARMA now balances the usage of the resources. So the problem here is now, okay, how should I bid? So now, CARMA is completely disconnected from money, and you cannot buy it from money. So there's not this equality between the utility that I have, I can convert it to money, doesn't hold anymore. So in the CARMA world, you should think about how do you use your CARMA? You want to go now or you want to go later, right? So if you bid too much, you go now, but then you lose the chance to go later when it could be more useful. If you bid too little, then you're not going, even though you would want to. So what you want essentially is to bid the amount that makes you indifferent to going now and paying the CARMA, or going another day and getting the CARMA. Right, so this is a dynamic optimization problem. So there's an urgency process. I think also important here is the discount factor for the feature, alpha, between 0, greater than 0 and 1, right? Because we'll see later what happens with different alphas. So how to decide what to bid? Well, this is a new class of games called dynamic population games. So this no, it's a game with an infinite number of agents. Each agent has a private state, that we call urgency. And there's also this counter, CARMA. Now, the policy of the agent is how much CARMA to bid as a function of your current urgency and over your current CARMA. So to the right, you see an example policy. So let's say there are two states, urgent and not urgent. For each state, I need to choose for each CARMA how much to bid. And the results will be intuitive. For example, you can see that in the urgent case, you tend to bid a lot more than in the not urgent case, right? Because you want to spend the CARMA when it's useful to you. And these are already, by the way, these are already the solutions of an equilibrium that we're going to see. Now, so that's individual, but there's a social state, right? So what is the social state? We have, it's a distribution of the states of each individual, right? And the policies of all the individuals. So the interesting thing here is that each agent has their own individual macro decision process, but they're coupled. So they're coupled through two things. One is that the immediate reward that you get depends on what the others will bid, right? And also the CARMA transition probabilities depend on the outcome of the bidding process, right? Now, for this kind of game, a stationary Nash equilibrium would be a social state, which is two components. One is that the state distribution, the other one is the policies. And we expect them, one, that the state distribution is stationary, and two, that the policy is a best response. Now, it's all credit to Isaac to show, because it showed that under very simple assumptions, mainly it's continuity of these two functions, and the fact you need to have a mechanism that allows the CARMA to be neither created or discarded, then there's always a stationary Nash equilibrium. So how does it look like? So this is the case where you can see in the bottom, you can see the urgency process with three states. And basically one is the default, intermediate, and the urgent state. So the default, I lost my, oh, yeah. Thank you. So there is a default state, then there's an intermediate state where you're very likely the next time to go to urgent, right? And the idea now is that you can have any kind of Markov process here, and we can find the best strategies. Right? So for example, you will see here that when it's the default state, you tend to bid in this way. When it's an intermediate state, well, you don't bid much because you know that the next state will be the urgent one. So this explains the dip here. When it's urgent, then you tend to bid all that you have up until 10. And here you see what's very important is the distributions of CARMA, right? So the distribution of agents that are in that particular state. So the distribution of agents that are with the default, the intermediate, and the urgent state. Okay, so now how does it compare to everything else? So it's a bit of a messy figure, but there's a lot of information. So I'm plotting here fairness and efficiency with this definition of efficiency. So efficiency for us is the average costs, right? So this includes your personal urgency. Fairness has to do with the usage of shared resources, right? So we measure the standard deviation of resource access, right? So this is lowest if everybody in the end went the same number of ways, right? And so here we put a few baselines. Coin is the coin toss. turn is basically turn taking. Like if you went the last time, you go the next time. Money is here extremely efficient but not fair, with the assumption. So this is with the assumption that you use money as a truthful value of your time. Right? So we see that, and now we have these two sweeps. So here the parameter is alpha, which is the discounting for the future. And then we have PBP, which is pay bit to the peer or pay bit to society. And they have similar results. And the interesting thing here is that if alpha is equal to 0, so it means nobody is thinking about the future, you get something that's not efficient but pretty fair. As you increase alpha, you get to a spot here where you have it's extremely fair and efficient. You know, it's not as fair as somebody who actually counts the number of accesses, right? But it is surprisingly interesting that's there. So far I talked about the homogeneous case where everybody has the same discounting factor and the same urgency process. So these results are for that. But the framework that we have is extremely flexible. So we can do all sorts of cases. We can do 25% of the population that has a certain urgency process and others that have different urgency processes, or we can play with the different discounting factors. So this is an example now where I have 4 types of agents. Okay? Not 4 agents, but population with 25% is one type, and so on, which have urgency processes that have the same average, but different processes. For example, phi4 here is an agent that always has 2 for urgency. So this one is one that has either 1 or 3, and it flips between the 2. So the average is 2. Then we have some extrema here where you have 11 and 1. So you are mostly always 1, except sometimes you have very urgent, and so on. And so now what I'm plotting here is the results of putting all these agents in the same population and playing the game. And here you see the bits. Here you see the CARMA distributions. And here it's what's interesting. So now, I guess if asked intuitively, like, who would be better in this kind of system? Like, do you prefer to be the guy who has just always the same urgency, or somebody who is mostly, always 1 except one time is 11? What would you say? It's hard to say, right? So the answer is that actually the one who has always the same urgency does worst. So why is that? Well, think about the other way. Suppose that you are the one who is always not urgent, but he knows that sometimes you get this super high urgency. Then you have a lot of chance to be strategic about it, right? So you have all these possibilities to actually accumulate karma when you don't need it, and then use it. So here you see that, in fact, the axis here, this is the axis, that's who goes first, right? And here is the cost. So you get higher access, but actually high cost. So you get high access here because actually other people are happier to let you go because they collect their own karma. So they give you higher access, but they actually get lower cost. And actually, so you see, actually, when you have heterogeneous populations, then you have to increase, extend your notion of fairness, right? Because, so what does it mean to be, so this is completely fair in the sense that everybody's playing the same game, right? So this is the optimal strategies, but you don't get equal access. Maybe this is equity, but not equitability. No, you have to be very precise about this. Then I want to make the example of the ants and the grasshopper. So this, you never see in this kind of work, where when you actually vary your population with different discounting factors, right? But we can do it. So now, if you don't know the story, the grasshopper likes to sing and dance, doesn't think about the winter, but the ants do, right? So it just, we say the discounting factor of the grasshopper is much lower than the ants, right? And in this example, we have 0.99, that those are the ends, versus 0.7. So now you see the equilibrium. See the karma distribution actually, if you are 0.99, you tend to accumulate a lot of karma when you need it, right, for the future. If you're the grasshopper, you don't. And then you see what happens is that, well, you actually, when you go much more often first, like if you're the ant, and you have lower cost. And okay, this again is it equitable? I don't really know, but the question is, if you want to change this, how can you do it? Actually, you can apply a small progressive karma tax. So when now your karma gets taxed, and now you can you have a better control, and so you can make it so that there is much less difference between the grasshopper and the ants. Okay, now let's turn to the other problem. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes. Okay, so this is actually the same problem that was discussed in the previous talk. How to allocate resources like lanes. Now, these are the very solutions. Let me tell you why they don't work. They're not fair, right? So HMV lines, you go only if you have more than one person in the car. If you're rich, you just hire somebody to be with you in the car, right? License plate rationing. So you go on Tuesday if your plate is odd or even, right? You just buy 2 cars, right? No problem. There are all sorts of mobility credit schemes, but these are actually convertible to money. So it's like a money mechanism with some subsidies because you get some credits for free. So we try to do this with CARMA, and now the situation is that we have the highway, we have a lane, which is the fast lane, which we will want to have at the maximum throughput, right? And the other lanes are congested. And so now this is a game not between 2 players, but between a lot of players that bid for access. And the idea is that here is that for each time slot, you can bid some karma, and we rank the bids, and we let all the highest bids go until we can keep the line at free flow. Otherwise, you have to get to the slow lanes. And in this case, there's not really peers. You pay the bid to the society, so it gets redistributed. Now, we just want to make a quick point here. So this is a standard cost function in the literature. So if you go to the slow lane, you pay a queuing delay. Then there are some penalties for arriving early, some penalties for arriving late. There are parameters you can adjust. And there is this U, which is the value of time in this literature. If you go fast, then you don't have, if you go to the fast line, you don't have the queuing delay. But you have an additional cost, which is a monetary cost. Now, in the CARMA setup, we don't have this monetary cost at all. What we have is that we interpret the value of time as the urgency. And then we just need to keep account in this because for each departure time, there's a game and there's bits and so on. So the notation becomes a little bit heavier. So this is what happens. Now I'm comparing CARMA versus the toll strategies. So here, let's start from here. So this is the queuing delay in the fast lane. This is the queuing delay in the slow lane. And essentially now, if you just interpret the value of time as CARMA, and the policy is basically the same, right? Because you just let people that have high CARMA go, and so you get exactly the same result. So this is very characteristic that the fast lane never incurs any delay, and this is the shape of delays that you get usually in the literature. Now, let's instead try the case of high income versus low income. Okay, so we have two income groups. And we see here, so the blue is the low income, the red is the high income. So now, if you pay tolls, what happens is that, well, if you're in the high income, then you don't have any delay, right? And you have a low travel cost. If you are low income, then you never get the the fast lane, and you get higher travel costs. So if you instead think about the CARMA result, instead is exactly equal, and this is the explanation is that so you're never, first of all, the urgency is something, it's a value that has value to you, right? And there's this compensation mechanism. So if you let other people go, if you don't bid that day, then you can you get more CARMA the next day because the others have bid. And so you obtain these results where actually this solves the problem. If the problem is your outcome should be uncorrelated with your wealth. That's not the notion of fairness. Okay, now to conclude, I like to see CARMA as something that lies between money and old-fashioned reputation. So it is like reputation in the way you acquire it, but it can be accounted just like some monetary quantity. And I think CARMA systems could be an aspect of socially responsible automation. What I'm convinced now is that if you're interested about fairness, well, then you should try to leave to think beyond money as a design tool, right? Because that doesn't promote fairness. CARMA mechanisms are an alternative. There are open questions. One is, for example, like if you have multiple systems, can they use all the same CARMA system? So money is fungible, right? Doesn't matter what you buy, what service you buy with the money. And can you compose CARMA systems to achieve and still keep fairness as a property? And we also realize that it's a jungle there of how to actually measure fairness. And I just mentioned, I think 3 or 4 now, but you can be much more detailed about that. So conclusions, we see CARMA as creating economies of favors. So this is just like what made Homo sapiens great 2 million years ago, and how to obtain it for today. So it is fair essentially because it is closed and regulated. So you cannot buy CARMA with other resources, and fairness is also dependent on the way you exchange it. So you exchange it based on strict rules. You actually need to go on the road, for example, to exchange it, to obtain CARMA. What's very interesting is that we achieve surprisingly high efficiency and fairness for a population of self-interest players. So everybody's playing, optimizing their own performance, that just play an equilibrium that's easily computable of a game, and which is that there is no coordination needed. So if everybody goes in the best interest, then this is what happens. But yet we see that the players act as if they were altruistic, because if you just see this from the outside, you say, oh, these are very polite cars, that let other people go. If they're not urgent, it's no problem. And also consider the reputation of others, right? Because you will see from outside that, oh, yeah, that car was very polite yesterday, so now they get to cross the road. And yeah, I'm finished. I would like to first, once again, thank my co-authors. And I'm happy to take any questions or later if possible.
Any questions? Maybe time for one. Yeah. When you do the comparison with money, you assume that people have the same money on the bank. I mean, if I do the CARMA, put a few CARMA accounts that are having really high CARMA for a long time, do I end up in the same amount as the money?
So you mean like one person having multiple CARMA accounts?
No, one person having a huge CARMA account is really rich on CARMA. Do I end up with the same fairness as with the money solution then?
Well, so the difference is that how that wealth was accumulated, right? So the CARMA that you accumulate can only be accumulated through your good deeds on the road, right? So you can have a lifetime of just letting other pass, and then at the end you will have the right to go. So that is what happens. As opposed to money, where I mean maybe you don't. Well, you have to choose whether if you accept that money is a good account of the credit you have towards society, then you're happy about that. Otherwise, you're not. I mean, I think here there's some part which is technical, right? It's a technical answer, but then in the end, what system to choose is it's not a scientist's place to say, right?
No, but what I'm trying to say is CARMA in the end just that we introduce a new currency where everyone starts equally?
How to start, you say?
Yeah, I mean, is it really something else than a new currency?
No, well, the idea is that it is a new currency,
Yeah.
and usually we start our simulations with everybody gets the same. We didn't really explore the dimensions, actually.
So do you think you can end up with the same thing as other currencies have ended up with?
But I think that, but I would be okay with that, you know. It's like, because I think a karma system, you know, your account in karma actually reflects, you know, your service to society. So
do you bequeath it to your kids?
No. Well, I wouldn't. I would think it's a personal.
So do the same with money.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
So, I don't know if you want to wait. Okay, so is there a sort of a notion of a zero-sum game in here? It's not just that you accumulate karma because of a good deed. It's also that simultaneously somebody else is doing a bad deed, and so it's their karma that is because there was an arrow from one to the other that you have. Is that not always the case?
So it is not a zero-sum game in the sense that, so if you just look at the resources, there are finite resources, so it's a zero-sum game. But actually, people don't care about access, they care about their outcomes. So they don't care about the resources when they're not urgent. So in fact, another way to look at money and karma, actually, money introduces liquidity, right? So you can save money because you don't need now, and then use it later. The same thing with karma. The whole thing is that when you don't need it to spend it, you just you don't spend it, you receive it, and then you save it for a rainy day.
So in your example, you had that, but that you're saying you don't really need that. You can accumulate karma without somebody else not having used up that resource.
No. You definitely want that as a strong condition.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that if you look, if you ignore the karma for a second and just look at people playing this game of resources, that's a zero-sum game, because either you get the resource or not.
That aspect. Okay.
Yeah. The thing is that when you introduce personal preferences, then it's not a zero-sum game anymore. In fact, I think, a Falk theorem that we have is that you actually are incentivized to play the karma game. Like if you're in a karma system and you can decide whether to play the game or not, actually it's better for you to play the game. So it's a strong result in that sense. Thank you very much.